Good morning, everyone. Liz, you did first of all, thank you for having me. Thank you all for having me. I was saying, Liz, you really did a fantastic job, I think, of crafting this panel between starting with the super macro data, then looking at the big data, and now we're going to get a little more micro and look at individual families. The research that I'm showing you today is from the US Financial Diaries. Sorry, some slight formatting errors on our deck. But we have a book. It is out and available in all of your bookstores. Is anyone familiar with this or heard of the US Financial Diaries? Wow, okay, one half. That is fantastic. So the other half of you, go ahead and pick up your book. But I'm not actually here just to sell, or at all to sell. The Diaries is really a fantastic new work that was put on by two organizations, my own, the Center for Financial Services Innovation, and NYU, with the principal investigators, Rachel Schneider, who's my former boss, and Jonathan Mordock, who is a professor of public policy and economics. And then this work was funded by the Ford Foundation, Citi Foundation, and the Omidyar Network. Got to thank your funders. The unique thing about this study is that its purpose was really to look into the lives of households and really get to see and taste and smell what it's like for low and moderate income households to live in modern America. The research was done around 2012. We looked at about 235 families, and we tracked every single inflow and outflow from their households over a 12-month period. This took place in 4 different regions and across a variety of ethnicities and demographic backgrounds in the United States. It was focused on low and moderate income families, and the idea was to have a rich set of data, but also a rich set of personal stories, and that's what I think makes this work unique. And so much of this is going to corroborate what you've heard, but it takes it and makes it a little bit more personal. I should say none of these photos or names are of the actual people in the research for anonymity purposes. So let's take a look at what we collected. So on the data side, over 300,000 cash flows were collected during the year. This was about 100 spending categories, 38 income types, and 69 financial instruments. This is now different than what Fiona has, which is the actual data, which is exciting. This was literally a field organizer sitting down with a family and tracking every single thing and asking them what money went in and out and in what kind of instruments. And then in addition, we asked all kinds of surveys of a variety of questions, about 460,000 answers to those survey questions on a variety of topics. I'm going to just focus on income volatility today, but of course if you want to look more, check out the book, and I'll put some links at the end where you can get more information. This couldn't be a nationally representative sample size with only 235 families, but we did want to make sure that it was sort of covering the variety of situations and households in America. So we picked 4 locations that would give us that flavor: California, Eastern Mississippi, Ohio, and Northern Kentucky, and New York City. And then within those areas, some rural, some urban, of different groups, and so really a nice variety of families that you'll see. In terms of the income level, as I mentioned, it was all LMI. So in the U.S., low and moderate income, it's slightly under the median income of about 55,000 household in the U.S. I would say like the extreme was 100,000 household income, and the lowest was $4,000 in household income. And then this shows you how it breaks down according to the supplemental poverty threshold, which is a way of measuring poverty in the US that adjusts for regional variation. And so you can see a real mix. That left quadrant, 27% at below the SPM, is really a pretty poor group that we consider. Then the next is sort of near poor. Then you have sort of low income and then moderate income. So you do have a variety even within this sample set. So let's talk about volatility and uncertainty in income and spending. And before I'm going to show you some data from the whole group, and then I'll show you specific data of one household and how this really plays out. But the story that always comes to mind for me is the story of Janice and Jeremy. So those of you who've read the book may know this family from Ohio, the couple. And Jeremy particularly, I think, sort of epitomizes the story of income volatility in that he was a mechanic for trucks, for long-haul trucks, and was paid partially on commission. So as a result, his work was highly volatile, depending on when trucks break down. And in his region of the country, which I think was Kentucky, trucks break down in the summer when the tar gets really hot, and they break down in the winter when the engines fail. In the spring and fall, not so bad. So this created this really bumpy income for his family that was incredibly stressful for him and his wife. By the end of the research, sort of at the end of the year, Jeremy had actually taken another job with a different company doing similar work, but that paid him a steady income. And in fact, the net annual income he was taking was less, and it had required a much longer commute. But to him, that stability was more important than the additional income at the end of the day. I think that's sort of the story of what we're talking about here. So this now is going to show you a very similar story in a more micro level to what Fiona was just showing you. Across the 235 families, when we looked across the year and looking at month by month, what we found is that there were about 2.2 months in the year where there was a spike in income that was greater than 25% of the average income, and then 2.4 dips where it was less than 25% of the average income. So what this means for these families, 5 out of 12 months, roughly, are sort of not normal months, and not normal by a decent amount. To look more granularly, and this again echoes what we've seen so far, this is in most cases within jobs, and it's about the variations of the paycheck within one job. So this looks at our Northern Kentucky sample, and you see, I think, 24 jobs here belonging to about 19 households. And this is the variation within paychecks. Across the year from the lowest to the highest. You can see the circle is the median, but the variation can go from 80% to 150% at the extreme to like 20% to 200% of the income. And it was, you see it across the different incomes. So this is stacked from lowest to highest. So it's a little bit more variable on the low side, but you see it across the income spectrum on this sample as well. And then spending patterns are also very variable. And they have their own spikes and dips, and for more than half of the spending spikes, they are not matched with the income spikes. Again, you're hearing the same things here. And additionally, we dug into a little bit to understand what are the causes of these spending spikes. I think there's sometimes an assumption that it's that one-time emergency. Okay, the car broke down. Okay, Susie got sick. But actually, in most cases, it's multiple categories. So we think it's one category, but in most cases, it's two categories or even no single category, but a variety of categories that is causing this spike in income. So multiple things are kind of coming together to cause these challenges for the households. Now, why do we think, this is the question that we had earlier, that what we saw across these samples that was causing this volatility? So one is those work hours rising and falling, whether it's because of the summertime, trucks breaking down, or holiday hours, but incredible amount of volatility in the hours that people are working, lumpy payments such as the tax refunds, a variety of health problems and emergencies for these families. They may have sort of predictable childcare and transportation needs, but those can have an uncertain timing or uncertain size. And we saw a lot of shifting household membership. So even just within the course of the year, we saw family members, younger people and older people, coming in and out of the household, moving out on their own, coming back. And so those shifting needs can dramatically change the income and the expenses that the net household is operating under. So now let's talk about a family. So these are the Johnsons. As I said, these are not actually the Johnsons nor their street, but this is a real family, just the names are changed. So Sam and Sarah Johnson, they are a hardworking couple based in Ohio. They are in their 30s and 40s. They have 3 kids, 2 from previous marriages and then 1 from their new marriage together, an 8-year-old daughter. They have a mix of regular full-time and part-time jobs. So if I get this right, I think Sam sells medical supplies. That's his main job. He's also a high school coach, and then he sometimes works at a call center for a wellness center. And Sarah has a 35 an hour, relatively steady job as an administrative assistant at her high school, or the high school where she works. She is also going back to get her bachelor's degree. They are very much struggling to make ends meet. Many times by the end of the month, they are reducing the amount that they spend on food and reducing the quality of food that they buy in order to make things last till that next paycheck. They are pretty savvy about how they spend that money. They're not very good at planning, but they're good at figuring out which paycheck goes to what. So one paycheck is earmarked for the mortgage. They are homeowners. One paycheck is earmarked for debt. One paycheck is earmarked for these different pieces of their lives, and that's kind of how they plan. This is a banked family. They do have multiple credit cards, and they basically use those credit cards to smooth out these various expense spikes and income spikes that they have, and that's kind of how they do their they smooth their own income. So now let's look, this is now one family's story. So we've gone from the biggest macro to the sort of smallest micro here in the data set. And you can see how all of the income piles up. I mean, and also how many types of income they have in this household. And this is simplified here. I think we've got, 8 or 9 different incomes. And just sort of working from the bottom up. I think it's just fascinating to look at how it piles. And this is just a 6-month window here, a 7-month window. You see Sam's sales income from the medical supply company. It goes down a little bit in the year. He actually ends up having an injury and has to go on disability for a while. Sarah's full-time income is relatively steady, although when it adds up, the whole picture isn't. Sam has this call center income, which is lumpy, which he uses to make up for when he has dips in the sales income. Then Sarah, who I said is back in school, she gets a grant twice a year, which is another form of income, but those are lumpy payments. Her son Matthew, who's also in college, he's I think a freshman, he has a couple of scholarships that come in at lumpy times. And then Sarah, who's getting child support from her ex-husband, that also doesn't come in at the steady straight, whatever it is supposed to be, like $200 a month. She gets like $50 a month and $50 a month, and then one month she gets $1,200 because he just received his tax refund. So the volatility is playing out everywhere. And Sam also has supplemental coaching income. Sarah does a little bit of work as a secretary, and then you've got other gifts and help. And so that's how this pieces together into that volatile income stream. So then let's look at the other side. Right here's the expenses, and this is even more volatile. And it's funny. It's like this seems unique, but every family has their own unique way of making this volatility their own. You see some things that are relatively steady, but maybe I want to say it's 20 or 25% of their spend is sort of steady month to month. So 75% or so is certainly not. And the biggest spike you see here is actually from they had to buy a new car because the car was no longer functioning to a place where it was reliable for them to get to work. Of course, that coupled with them needing to do a roof repair in the same month, right? And so then you have that gigantic spike in September. As I mentioned, Sarah, does this sort of sophisticated or not sophisticated, depending on how you look at a way of managing her money and her bills with different paychecks. That works when it works until it really doesn't, right? When you don't have the paycheck you need to pay for that expense that's just come in. And the thing she really wants most is just to be able to kind of consistently and reliably pay in full her electric and phone bills, not in these bits and pieces. This is just showing the income and expenses and how they line up. And of course, they don't always line up together. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And that's where it really creates this instability. And sort of to sum it up, one of the stats on the left from, and I'm sorry about the formatting here, guys, from Pew found that when you asked families what do they want more, financial stability or moving up the income ladder, Pew found that 85% of Americans prefer stability. And so we asked the same question to our sample, slightly different numbers. When you look at the left, which is really, I guess, the middle graph here, this is for the poorest households in the sample. Still, about 2/3 of them said they want stability more than climbing up the income ladder, even though they desperately need to. This stability is still what they value most, and is slightly higher for those that have a slightly higher income. The final takeaway, sort of what we think our recommendations are coming out of looking at this data. So one is what we call smooth and spike. And I'd say you can look at the income volatility situation and think that the solution is to find a way to even the whole thing out. But our research and some companies that we've worked with that have tried to do that have actually found that's not necessarily what families want. There's clearly a need for smoothing, and that's a combination of liquid savings and affordable credit. But there's also a value to the spike, right? When families get that tax refund in the US, they pay down a whole bunch of debt. And it's actually really a powerful moment for them. And if you were to entirely take away the spike, they wouldn't have that opportunity to kind of clear things out of their system. So how do you balance the need to give people the right amount of smoothing, but also give them that spike to handle things that they've been wanting to handle for a long time? Another thing you can do is to align the inflows and outflows, so if you've got paychecks coming in at a certain time, but they're not lining up with your bills, can you either change when the paychecks arrives or when the bills are due? We've seen some lenders in the US who've started doing this and allowing a borrower to actually pick when their loan is due to align up best with their paycheck. And then ultimately you've got to sort of balance this structure with flexibility so that consumers, They want a little bit of help to manage this sort of incredibly volatile life they have. They want you to sometimes kind of tell them what to do or do it for them or automate it or set the right defaults, but not without any control for them and not without any flexibility, because their lives just have this volatility that even the best devices can't really manage. So those are our takeaways, and happy to speak more during the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Oh, and here you can find more information.
Thanks so much, Rob. It's remarkable what the study has unleashed in terms of insights and also ongoing thinking and application and innovation. And Rob has just touched on a few things that are going on in the United States around this, the things that they're exploring as solutions. It's also sparked some interest in doing similar work in Canada. So SSHRC has actually approved funding for slightly more modest version of the Financial Diaries, led by Dr. Jerry Buckland out of Winnipeg. And we've actually done a really tiny little tax time Financial Diaries approach where we've actually followed households through the pre-tax season, tax filing, and onward. So we're looking forward to releasing the results of that in a symposium in the fall. So you're on our symposium invite list, so we'll include you all. So it has inspired a lot of follow-on work, I know in the United States, but also here in Canada. So thank you very much to CFSI for its leadership in this. And as Bette Miller said, from a distance, everything is beautiful, but when you get up close, it doesn't quite look the same. So I think we see this as an important opportunity to underscore the value of combining that national aggregate analysis and data with a much finer grained look at what's actually happening in households and more qualitative research on this as well. So thank you for leading the way.